Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mort. It is Monday, Memorial Day, which is a U.S. holiday, which means I don't have to work today. I can do this walk and then go do whatever I want to do, which will be kind of nice. It's about 5:30 a.m. I definitely woke up early. Getting back on the streaming schedule definitely has its impacts. So maybe not as well rested as a normal day, but that's okay because I don't work today, so it's fine. Yeah, if you're watching this might be the first episode I make public as opposed to unlisted. So welcome. This is a morning thing I do every morning, Monday through Friday now, where I just talk about stuff I want to talk about and answer questions. Let's see. I did start streaming again this weekend. As I said, I couldn't stay away. There's parts of it I really like. And I will say, doing it again this weekend, I'm glad I came back. It was like, just sitting there playing TFT is such a fun game to play with other people and have those like really cool reactions. So when you have those amazing games that you were able to pull off a tight finish, or you get a high roll moment or anything like that, it's so fun. That's when TFT is at its most fun. And so I definitely enjoy playing it on stream like that more than I enjoy playing it sort of solo. And so, yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed. I felt like, honestly, I handled my new approach while streaming pretty well. I think there was one time where someone was like complaining about Morgana and wanting her to be nerfed, and I almost, went back to bad habits, but I didn't. So, I'll keep working on it. I will say, actually, the biggest lapse I had this weekend, though, was I was trying to watch the tournament this weekend, and I had Froden's channel open, like I always do. And my wife and I had just left. We'd got dinner, because she talked me into getting her dinner. And so we came back with the dinner, and I turned it on. I was going to sit there and watch while eating dinner. And they had Milk on. And Milk was immediately yapping about balance to some extent, just saying like, "Oh, the balance team likes to do it." And like, again, that need to, like, I got angry because he's saying things that are just factually untrue. But his Twitch chat kind of was like, "Uh-oh, Mort, stay away." And so actually, you know what? I took their advice. I was like, you know what? You're right. I just didn't watch. I turned it off. I went and did something else. Played some Binding of Isaac. It was fun. So I'm going to need to do that more. And like I said, there's just going to be certain parts of the community I'm just going to have to avoid. I'm just going to have to for my own mental. And, it is what it is. So now that being said, that does mean I missed the cool final game. Congrats to Wajan Iverson. That was really cool. That final fight between him and Broseph. Two people, by the way, that I think are really good members of the TFT community. Both played really, really well. And it coming down to that final Tibbers. Like, that's when the set design team is making their champions like that. Those are the moments they envision, right? It's like, oh, there's going to be this final fight, and Annie's going to be casting, and she's going to have Tibbers out, and then Tibbers is going to clutch a final fight. Like, that's perfect. That is like what we want. And so, when we're trying to balance the game, we're trying to make sure those fantasies play out in that way, right? And so Tibbers, as an example, yes, he's a big bag of meat, but if he doesn't hit hard enough, then you never get those clutch moments. And so you have to make sure that his DPS output is enough to create those clutch moments, but not so high that you value Tibbers more than you do AP, stuff like that. And so, like, that's why I had to go in and like rewrite Tibbers AD scaling formula so that AP actually mattered to it and stuff like that. So pretty cool. But congrats to those two. And yeah, so overall, solid weekend though. I'm glad to be back to streaming. My editors jumped right at the gun. They both were like, "Cool, here's some stuff. We can get that uploaded." I really like my shorts editor. He does such a good job putting those together and finding cool moments from the stream. So shout out to him especially. Yeah, so cool. All right, so let's answer some questions. All right, first question was, What idea do you wish worked but didn't? You're going to laugh, but this is actually a really obvious one. I'm going to go with shadow items. And, shadow items are one of the biggest failures of TFT history. When we talk about, what we implemented and things like that and the impact it had on the player base, I think it's our last big failure. Set 2 being one, and there's been balanced stuff, but it's our last really big one that was such a big mistake that it almost cost us players. But the thing that's frustrating is the whole reason we had the premise that shadow items were okay is because as a designer who likes puzzles and who likes strategy and having to make tough decisions and weighing statistical things, the idea of Kiss Curse is something I think every game designer has their phase where they dive into and they're like, this will be an interesting decision. This will be good for the game. Having Kiss Curse in the game can be really, really valuable, and not really valuable, but it can be a unique puzzle, right? Where it's okay, if the curse says that every time I cast I lose health, then in order to really gain the benefit, I need to make sure I have some Omnivamp and things like that. And so in theory for these type of games, and I think you see this in lots of these other type of deck builder and roguelike games, where it's you'll get a powerful artifact that does a thing but at a drawback, right? It's all your cards cost 1 energy, but you can only draw 1 less card per turn. And it's ooh, that's a powerful thing but at a trade-off. And it's even Blotro does some of this as well to some extent, right? It's you take some choices and yeah. So I think the design space that would have opened up would have been really, really cool. I think now I think the big thing though was that the item space wasn't really the space to do that. If we talk about Kiss Curse in the item space, and over time what we've noticed is that the item space, especially the core item space, is just supposed to be which champion do you want to power up and have that nice smooth power up? It's not meant to be which champion do you want to power up, but if you didn't read this item right, you completely screw yourself and your carry disappears. That's not the right space. And so I think slowly over time, we've moved that Kiss Curse space into the augment space and masked it really, really well, right? I think there are a bunch of examples of augments that you could debatably say are Kiss Curse. You could also frame it as a different way of they're more their quest augments or their trade-offs or things like that. But let's use Cruel Pact as an example. An extreme example. Is Cruel Pact a Kiss Curse augment? Kind of, right? The benefit is you can level up very quickly, but the trade-off is you do it at health. But that's a very, very extreme example. I think quest augments are another example of this. Trait Tracker is not the best example, but the adventure one where you have to 3-star 2/2 costs, that one's kind of like Kiss Curse, where it's if you play down a Prismatic for a while, then the trade-off is you get a bunch of power later. But that's not the exact same Kiss Curse, right? But a really obvious example of an augment that would be Kiss Curse, but we've never done this, would be actually wait, Glass Cannon. Glass Cannon is close to this. Lose 10% of your health, gain 20% damage amp. That's kind of Kiss Curse. But even in that example, it's funny. If you look at it when we first put it on PBE, I think it was 75% health. Sorry, uphill part. I think it was 75%, and then you gained 25% damage amp. But even that, the curse, the losing health was so extreme, players hated it. So we ended up basically backpedaling it to where 10% was the most we would take away, so that you barely notice the curse. Because even in the augment space, players want positives, not negatives. So it's a shame. from a designer perspective, having that design space where you can do these sort of trade-offs would be so interesting. But it just never worked out. And even in the augment design, right? Like, trench coat is something you could argue has elements of Kiss Curse. Because it's like, well, if you break too soon, you lose some benefit. But like, not really. But artifacts would have been another spot where we could have put some Kiss Curse. It just hasn't worked out. So, yeah, I think final answer for me is the concept of Kiss Curse in TFT with shadow items. That not working out has really limited, I think, potential design space that could have been fun, but only for our most like dedicated nerdy players. So, yeah, I think that's my answer. Other stuff that we could consider that didn't work out. I mean, there's example augments. I think the fortune augment is another example where it's like, if we could have got that out of the trait space, that could have been really cool. Golden Quest is another example. I think the Golden Quest augment was really, really cool. It was a neat concept, but again, it's these quest augments, right? Golden Quest is more of a quest augment. The fortune one, the problem was it turned into like a weird open fort simulator, which wasn't great either. So, yeah, I think that would be my second vote, would be moving the risk-reward fortune-esque traits into the augment space didn't work out. And if it had, that would have been pretty cool. Could have opened up a new design space for augments. That would have been neat. But yeah, so there you go. There's my answer. All right, next question. Thoughts or lessons learned in Hyperroll? Yeah, this is a good question because, as you know, Hyperroll is shutting down at the end of this set. It's been around since like, I want to say set 3, set 4? I forget when we turned it on exactly. The thing is, we kind of learned those lessons pretty quick and just never really acted on them other than like behind the scenes. So, for example, when you're talking about like what lessons you learn, the first thing you have to frame is, well, what were your goals in the first place, right? So, when we were making a mode like Hyperroll, our goals were, first off, hey, TFT games take 40 minutes. We want to make a 20-minute mode, right? Something that's quicker. And the average Hyperroll game, I believe, takes 15 to 22 minutes. So we were successful in that regard. Cool, nothing really to learn. And if anything, what we learned is there is some audience of people that want that for sure, but the majority of our audience is actually like kind of comfortable with the 40-minute game, and they don't want an alternate mode, right? Like, when people want to play TFT, they want to play the main TFT. They want to take all their skills and all their lessons that they've been honing and practicing over the years and use them. And so when you go into an alternate mode and the game rules are too different, all of a sudden those skills that they've learned become irrelevant and they have to learn new skills. And players don't necessarily want to do that at a wider scale. There are some that do, for sure, but overall, not really. And that kind of lesson helped us with Double Up. When we were making Double Up, we had toyed with some ideas that were like very different than core TFT, but they just felt so different and they kind of backed up that theory that you can't go too different from baseline TFT. So that was a big important lesson for us. The other thing is that generally when we talked about this like 20-minute mode, the goal was that it was for people that were like, ranked is too stressful. I don't really want to play ranked because it's so stressful. I'd rather play this lighter mode. And in fact, if you look at the Hyperroll ranked system, where it has the like get up to 4,200 to hit orange tier, it was meant to be a less stressful ranked experience. Because behind the scene, for those who don't know, the MMR required to hit Hyper is about the equivalent of like Diamond 3. Diamond 3 on ranked is what it takes. Like, it was meant to be a less stressful grind. So the whole goal of the mode was less stress. The problem was with that execution of Hyperroll, each individual turn ended up being more stressful to some extent, right? TFT has these moments where it's like, okay, stage 2-1, you pick your argument, you build your board, you set your direction. And then from 2-1 to 2-3, you're kind of just watching fights, maybe interacting with the shop with like a unit or two. But realistically, you're not making a ton of moves from 2-1 to 2-3. Then you do the carousel. And then there's some downtime again. You level up on 2-5, throw in another unit, 2-5, 2-6. Not a lot going on, you know? And so TFT has this nice sort of like, you can't see it, I'm hand motioning, but these nice lulls, these nice breaks in the action that create these good peaks and valleys of action, you know? PvE round comes, you do your 3-2 roll down, high action, back to low. Hyperroll was just go, 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 go. Every turn you've got gold to spend. You've just leveled up. You've got a new unit to put in. Like, the amount of actions you have to take in Hyperroll was so extreme that there wasn't as much downtime, and that made the mode generally more stressful. So we kind of failed pretty hard on that goal here, which was to make a less stressful mode, and it wasn't. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say it's like more difficult than core ranked or anything like that, but it's a different kind of stress, right? It's like the APM action stress rather than like the thoughtful strategic stress. And so if we, you know, make something that replaces Hyperroll someday, and if we have that same goal, we're going to have to do it differently. Or we need to change our product strategy and change our goals to be something different, right? Like if we, hypothetically, this is fake, but like if someone said, hey, we want to make a mode that is actually just for our ranked people, but you finish it in 6 minutes and you get all the intensity of TFT in 6 minutes. Okay, cool. We could do something like that, right? Versus, hey, for people who think ranked is too hard, we want to make a 6-minute mode. Those are two very different games, you know? And so we have to make sure that we hit those goals. And I think that's the biggest thing that caused Hyperroll to not be like a long-term success, is it wasn't really a gateway to TFT. It felt a little bit too separate. Now, that being said, I will say I personally enjoyed my climbs every set, right? It's like, it gave me a space where I could just go play the new mode for a bit, a little stress, like, because typically when we launch a patch, I'm also supposed to be monitoring things, and then I might have work meetings that day, because usually on a Wednesday. Hi, bunny. So Hyperroll was like, cool, I can sneak in a 20-minute game and then get back to work. And so that part was successful for sure. And it was fun. I have set 13 and 14 where I'm, you know, NA first, world second each time, which is kind of fun. So I'll miss it to some extent. But, you know, there are things in the future that, like, it's the right time. It's the right time to finally pull the plug on it. And, you know, I think all the way back in like set 7, I was talking about how we'd have to pull the plug on Hyperroll eventually. And the thing I always said was, well, we won't pull the plug unless we have something to replace it. Well, we kind of do now. The things we replaced it with are, for new players, we have Talker's Trials that they can play and learn the game. And then for people who want something that's a little less stressful than ranked, we often have things like set revivals, Chonk's Treasure, that are almost always on at various times. So there's usually something for those players to do that don't necessarily want to dive straight first into ranked. So they have stuff. And to top it off, is we're going to keep developing in that space. So there will be more. But yeah. I think those are the big lessons we've learned from Hyperroll. So, yeah. All right, next question's an easy one. For set 13, we used code names that eventually ended up getting leaked. Now, they were leaked after the fact, so it did no harm. But this is the fact that, like, Smeech, his code name was Gremlin, or Loris's code name was Beardy. Steb's code name was Fish. Powder's code name was blue. Violet's code name was red. We had all these code names. And so the question the player asked was like, do you still use code names? The answer to that is actually no. The code names were developed because Arcane Season 2 was like very, very high secrecy. And especially when developing a show like that, people want to leak spoilers and things like that. And if you've looked at TFT, or not TFT, but League in general, right? Actually, I guess you could even say games in general. There's a lot of leaks, right? Sometimes they're unintentional. Sometimes it's somebody has a data name in a file that gets, data mined on PBE. Sometimes it's somebody leaks a thing. That's a car. Let me get out of the way. Whew. Okay. Sometimes it's something small. Sometimes, it's something big, but there's always leaks. And so for extra security measures involving Arcane Season 2, we made sure that anything that didn't just look like generic TFT had code names. So that if any of those files somehow got leaked out, all you would see is, we're adding fish and gremlin. That doesn't tell you much. But if you specifically saw Powder and Violet, that's pretty damning, right? Like, that's a massive leak. Now, fast forward to, let's say, set 15. And I'm going to purposely pick a champion that's very unlikely to be in sets. Let's say you saw file name Ivern and Rek'Sai. That doesn't tell you much. Whoa, the new TFT set is using League of Legends champions? That's crazy. Who cares, So generally, we haven't found the need for that. And even interestingly enough, I think the only example other than Arcane where I can think of us using code names is not so much code names as it is placeholder names. So, for example, Kobuko, one of the things they say when you're making a new thing in development is you need to pick a name so absurd that you can't ship it. Because the problem is, if you pick a name close enough to something that could be shipped, people will stick to it, they'll grow close to it, and they'll go, I want to change it. Or I don't want to change it. That's actually what happened to Teamfight Tactics. Teamfight Tactics was the placeholder name. And then it came time to choose a name, and everyone was like, but it's just Teamfight Tactics. I've gotten used to it. So to that end, Kobuko, his placeholder name was Frank the Tank. We're not shipping Frank the Tank. Though even that, there were definitely a few people on the team that were like, no, but that's Frank. That's Frank the Tank. You can't change that. It was like, guys, we purposely picked that name because we couldn't ship it. Got to do better. Obviously, Kobuko's way better, But it's just one of those funny things you see in game development where it's like, you have to pick really silly code names. It's like, when I was at Nintendo, all of our code names, because my boss was a crazy cat lady, we would name our projects after cats. So the very first game I worked on at Nintendo was Project Munchkin, after Munchkin cats. And then the crosswords game I worked on was Project Siamese. So that same car missed their turn, came back and found their turn. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so project names are explicitly chosen to be pretty silly like that. But so TLDR here is no, we don't generally use code names anymore. So, but then again, if we do something cool and secret in the future, we probably will again. Now, by telling all of you this, are now the data miners going to look for silly words that could be code names? I mean, they were already. Nothing changes. So, there you go. All right, one more question for today. This one's a fun one. How does it feel keeping secrets in TFT? For example, when people ask you about, an Archangels for AD items, and you have to give a response where it's like, nope, I don't know, but you actually know one's coming with Kraken. How does that feel? The answer is, like, I'm used to it, but also it'll never not feel kind of weird, because the thing about this is I have built up a rep with you guys about being transparent and open and honest, and I like that honesty. But if you ask me, like, a specific, like, dumb example, this is, again, fake example, I'm using the least popular champion on purpose. If someone came to me and said, is Ivern in set 15? And let's say he was, but I have to go, nope, or I don't know. I'm essentially lying, right? Which I don't like to do. I don't like to lie. I'd rather tell you guys exactly what. But at the same time, the reason you have to keep those things a secret is because, we build things like our publishing beats and create exciting hype moments for you guys based around those moments, right? Like, what's cooler if you get a really cool trailer that shows Ivern in the new set in a really cool, dramatic way, kind of like they did with Elise in Cyber City. Like, I think everyone was really excited to see, like, Elise in a cinematic. That was freaking cool. But if I had just beforehand been like, oh yeah, Elise is totally in the next set, like, that ruins that, right? That ruins the surprise. So it's important to create the barrier where we can have those hype moments for you guys to get everyone excited. Now, that's not to say, one of the things I'll never lie about, even if Riot tells me to, is our motivations for something, right? Like, I don't want to be that guy where it's like, well, why do you guys have the battle pass end? And I say, it's because we want you to actually, like, finish the battle pass, feel good about your purchase. That's true. But what I would never do is, like, if Riot was like, okay, but tell them that, but actually we do it secretly to, like, manipulate, like, no, I'm not going to do that, right? I also wouldn't work for that company if that was a thing. So it's a fine line, but again, things like the AD item, it's like, isn't it cooler to find out, like, oh, they're doing this rework where there's 6 upgrades, and that's cool, versus, like, Mort going when I get asked about an AD item and I go, oh yeah, that's pretty cool, we're working on it, it'll be here in a few patches. Much less exciting. So oftentimes, anytime I have to hold those secrets, it's so that we can create those cool hype moments that get people jazzed up, excited to play things, and it's just part of the job. The other thing is, this took some training in my own brain, but I know what set 15 and 16 and 17 and 18 and 19 are, but it's like, when I'm thinking about those things, I'm able to sort of compartmentalize them as, like, future Mort can deal with those. And then when I'm talking to everybody else, it's like present day Mort, right? I'm happy that, all my examples, it's funny, the item examples, I got a lot of questions from, like, our partners and from players about, like, well, how do these new items get used well? And we were making these new items, a lot of it was around set 15. It's like, well, we're doing it for this reason, but I can't use that, right? So I have to go and find examples of, like, well, here's how they work in 14, and verifying that they work in 14 and don't cause problems in 14. But actually, the best examples are in 15 because that's who we designed, So it's just part of the deal. Yeah, like, and again, the other thing is just that, again, for my both strength and personality flaw, is that I like talking about TFT. And so sometimes, you get me in the right spot in a one-on-one thing, and I might be a little more loose-lipped than I should sometimes, but thankfully never in, like, a public space or anything like that. And so it's like, or like another rioter can come up to me and be like, oh, what's going on with this? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you about this cool thing we're working on. It's so cool. I love talking about it, So not being able to talk about some of the cool stuff, right? Like, there's at least one thing on TFT right now that is, like, so close and near and dear to my heart, and I'm so excited about it. I can't talk about it. And in fact, even just saying that there's one thing that's so close and near and dear to my heart, who knows? Maybe I'll get a talk to from someone who's like, you shouldn't have said that. So, the guards are high. But that's mainly the primary motivation on why I have to keep things secret. And it feels weird sometimes, but it's important. It's important to make sure, because, you know, Riot always says this thing, and I know some people don't believe it, or it can be buzzwordy, but it's like, you know, everything for the players, we serve our players. But in this case, it's true, right? Like, we literally keep these secrets so that you guys have these really hype moments, so that when a Cyber City trailer comes out with Elise in it, everyone's like, that's super sick, that's awesome, and good times are had. So yeah, there you go. All right, we hit the 30-minute mark. I try to make these about 30 minutes each day. Hopefully now you guys know that I'm coming back to streaming, and so you guys can look forward to that if you're looking forward to it. Make sure you ask questions on the Discord. That's how we pick from these. They get upvoted, and I just answer. I have very little control over what's left. I wake up in the morning, I look at like the oldest questions that are still there that have a few upvotes, and I just answer those. So, and I talk for 30 minutes and get through as many as I can, and then there we go. So, all right, yeah, rest of my day, I'm just gonna do some paperwork, clean up a bit. Oh, my shelves come tomorrow. I can't wait to show you guys my shelves. I have been so excited for these shelves for like 4 months now. They finally come tomorrow, so that's a big deal for me. That's gonna give me something to do. And then work's gonna kick up tomorrow. A bunch of people are on vacation, get back, which means there'll be a lot to do, a lot to talk about. Curveball coming up, so yeah, should be fun. Cool. All right, that's gonna do it for me. Hope you guys enjoy Walk the Dog. As always, your positive feedback is why I'm still here and continuing on. Screw the haters. All right. All right, cool. All right. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.